everyone. My visuals will not be able to follow that very well, which that was beautiful. So I very quickly, I know everyone probably wants to see the sunshine again because we're in this beautiful place, but we're going to talk like I said, quickly about moments that make a loyal audience. We've been talking about connecting with consumers, about having a direct relationship with readers, about storytelling. So why do moments matter? Moments, when you think about your life, you think about what you remember, what you go home and tell your spouse about, or what you come into work and tell about your weekend. Everything's a pretty steady line. And then you have moments that you remember. You have a moment, you have a graduation of your kid, you have a wedding that you went to, you have a conference that you attended, a golf course that you played that you didn't get to play before, which was very exciting. And what we think a lot about at Parsley is how do you value the attention that your audience is giving you to create those moments, to create that relationship. Because the conversion or the metric or the KPI that you want is really important, but if you're not creating the moments early on, you won't get there. So I have some data to share about how to create those moments. And I don't like to talk to people without introducing myself, so I'm Claire. I run marketing at Parsley. Prior to that, I spent a lot of time at a B2B media publisher in the renewable industry called Green Tech Media. And that's how I actually found Parsley. I used to be a client. And Parsley itself, if you're not familiar with us, what we're probably best known for is our analytics dashboard, which is used by content media publishers like Wall Street Journal, Condé Nast, HuffPost, some of the brands here. But we also have some technology products, including an API for product development for things like custom personalization, content recommendations. We actually, Tony mentioned the integration with PostUp at the beginning of the day that we do. We can do personalized emails through that. And data pipeline, which ties in, people use that to build their own internal analytics system or tie together with advertising data, create segments. Actually, you can do sort of unlimited things. Those are sort of used by data scientists, more business teams, advertising teams. So if you want to talk to me about any of those, happy to tell you more. But let's talk about this data I mentioned at the beginning. And this was also, Steve mentioned this at the beginning, the past few years, the thing is that scaling, it wasn't just scale and growth was happening. Facebook made it really predictable, right? You knew how to reach a bunch of people very easily, and you didn't have to think very hard about it. And so this chart goes up to about beginning of 2017, right? And the green line's Facebook up there. And we track this. You can find it actually on our website, the most current up-to-date numbers. Facebook, but you want to talk about a moment. When people scrolled through that Facebook feed, they weren't experiencing moments. They were just experiencing a long feed of stuff that sort of blended together, right? And so what's really interesting is, of course, this is the last 12 months or so, when Facebook's really taken this dip, and everyone sort of freaked out about it. But what I like to think about it is Facebook didn't do this because they wanted to punish the content industry or change the relationship with media. Their users were leaving, right? They did it because their product was in trouble. And that's because their users weren't experiencing moments either. So it made it a little less predictable. The more predictable you are, the less moments you can create, though. And so now we've just got to figure out, well, what are these moments we can do? This was one moment created, I think, very, very interestingly. When this data came out, we saw one of the largest, in case anyone missed this, Brazil's largest newspaper just went up and they said, we're not going to post there anymore. We're not even going to spend our time doing it because our audience isn't valuing it. And this isn't just about Facebook and Google. We look at diversification here. Now they are much lower, right? When you break down Twitter, Flipboard, Pinterest, Google News, and Google Other, which I'll talk about in a second. But and we're seeing a big push in Apple News, although their data is slightly different, which I won't go into up here, but I can tell you if you have some questions about it. With these numbers on an aggregate level aren't maybe as exciting or massive as the Facebook and Google numbers. But we definitely have clients where, LinkedIn, which doesn't even show up here, is going to be 30% of their traffic source, right? And they're big and they're doing that well. So it's really about understanding where that audience values their time and tapping into those too. And we think that there's some interesting stories coming out of places that look outside of the duopoly for data. And even if it is the duopoly Google, this is just data we put out recently. Google is not just search. We're seeing a big rise in their discovery platform as well, which is, if you're not familiar with it, basically on Android, if you're, I think of it as the Apple News of Android, which is probably not how Google's marketing team wants me to think of it. But if you look and see recommended for you content, they're making a huge push into that as well. So that's another technology company sort of recognizing this moments that matter. So, summarize that part. Whether they come from Facebook, Google, Flipboard, Pinterest, I don't care where they come from. The thing that matters to me, and the thing that our clients use our data for, is that they place a value on the attention the audience gives wherever they're coming from, and then sort of understand what to do with it and what strategies to make. So let's go to that. How do you do that? Identifying these moments, one of the things is focusing on engagement. And how can you measure if you're doing it well? So this is we do a lot of data studies. That's the other thing we're kind of known for. These are all free. They're on the website, and some of the links are down there. But how can you measure if you are directly connecting and you're creating those moments? So we looked at it. We do engage time through our platform, and we looked at engagement rates. And we basically said, instead of trying to figure out what the word count is and how long something should be read based on the average American's read time, which frankly is kind of, if you're looking at a business audience, probably going to be really different from other audiences. But instead of doing it that way, what if we kind of use the collective power of data science to say, well, if there's 1 million people on one article, how long are they each staying there? What's sort of the maximum expected amount of time you look at an article to see? And so you can see the results up here where we sort of excluded what we called sort of bad visits, or maybe what would traditionally be thought of as bounced. All of these are actually technically bounced visits, right? That just means someone left. But we thought, well, it doesn't really, if they stayed for 7 minutes and they quote unquote bounced, they still connected with that moment, with that story. So the mean right there was about 50% of visits were between 1 and 7 minutes. And then you had the top 2%, which were above 5. So that was kind of exciting to look at and think about bounce rates, which have been, how useful are they really with people coming from all these different places, thinking about them in a different way. Another moment that I got really excited about, this is the moment I like to tell people, is when HuffPost asked us to put this on our blog because they thought our readers would be more interested in it than the HuffPost audience, and their audience is much bigger than my blog. But their data team did an analysis of whether their readers were sort of Trump fatigued. Their editorial team had the sense, are we writing about it too much? It's a year later, do people still care? Are they still as fired up as they were? HuffPost obviously rather on the liberal side of things. And instead of just making an assumption, they wanted to test the data around it. So I won't explain they actually looked at quite a number of different things. And the blog post is on our blog as well as on HuffPost. But they were able to change their strategy around how they covered their politics sector based on whether people are actually paying attention. And they found, one of the more interesting things they found was that people weren't getting fatigued per se, but that their attention was sort of more dedicated towards topic verticals rather than Trump as a general overall topic. And finally, just a note on the word engagement, because I used it a few times. One of the things that I think when we're talking about a shift to direct to consumers, or whether it's subscription, we had a long conversation about value selling, which I think is really important, is that it requires a whole organizational rethinking, and a couple people have mentioned that, but I'm just going to emphasize it because if not everyone is talking about the same thing internally, your customers are never going to hear the same thing. And that's, if you only get them to hear one thing and have one moment with you, you need to make sure it's the moment you want them to have. So whether, that means everyone's focused on a certain KPI or whether it's a shared language internally. We did a data study this a few back, that said, do you even have an agreed upon definition of engagement in your organization? And more than half of people said no. So hopefully that number's risen a little bit. But making sure that you know what that means or what you're shooting for, I think is something that every company should be really paying attention to. Unless you think this is, sounds nice but has no monetary impact, just want to talk about one of our case studies to wrap up. Slate, one of our clients, they changed their whole company KPI to engage time. They actually really wanted to focus on loyalty specifically, and they said if we can tell how much time people are spending with us, and if it is what our editors look at, if it's what our analysts look at, if it's what our research team, business team, subscription model looks at, we think that we are going to be more successful in improving all of our monetization efforts. And so they did that by bringing in Parsley, by replacing some of their legacy systems with it, by integrating, like I said, some of the, not just the dashboards, but the actual technology solutions into their tech stack, and including the data pipeline. They pivoted from looking at unique visitors to engage time. I think one of the things that was very important was that they were able to talk about it again across the whole company and use that shared language of engagement. They established this loyalty metric, and it really, we had their director of research talk about this case study at another conference, and she did make a very clear point, which I will echo, which is this slide looks really short. It took a year and a half to get, to the first step. So it was a significant effort on their part, but the results is that their membership program has increased. The loyalty metric is something that's adopted by every team. The reading experience makes visitors stay longer. They've seen an increase in their Slate Plus membership. 50% of their total headcount at the company uses Parsley in some capacity every day. And they feel like they have a deeper understanding of what engages their audience. So that's that. If you have any questions, I'm here. My colleague Katie is sitting over there as well. And we'd love to talk to you about any of the things that was talked about today, value selling, brand. That's all kind of my wheelhouse. And if you are an audiophile, like was mentioned before, we have a podcast that talks about a lot of these stories as well. So we launched it earlier this year. And if you're going to be on a plane, say very soon, and need some listening, it's called The Center of Attention. It's on iTunes. It's on our blog. And so I very much encourage people. We also have a GDPR episode very recently that people have found very helpful. So enjoy that, and thank you for listening, and go get some coffee and some sunshine. Thanks.
Thank you, Claire.